Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our session 4 of Legislative Action Day series. I'm so grateful and happy that you're here to join us for this, this session about the 87th legislative session with some incredibly gifted panelists who will be speaking with you shortly. My name is Catherine Ervin. I'm the Director of Legislative Affairs for the Austin AFP Chapter Board of Directors. I'm also the Director of Development and Communications here in Central Texas at St. Andrew's Episcopal School, an independent school, K through 12. And these last two sessions today are really focused on local and national initiatives that affect our nonprofit space. And so whether you're a fundraiser or you're advocating for your donors and constituents, today's sessions really focus and hone in on specific legislation, bills, regulations, and things that directly affect the work that we do. And so this morning's session really is about key policy, legislative, and regulatory issues that are top of mind for all of us as fundraisers and those of us representing nonprofits. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our amazing panelists, Molly Weiner and Colette Vallot. I'll read their bios really quickly and then turn it over to them so that you can learn some more about what is going on and how you can help advocate for your particular nonprofit. Molly is the Director of Nonprofit Engagement at United Ways of Texas. She engages with nonprofits to build their collective voice and advocate for the sector. She previously worked as the Director of Policy and Advocacy for Texas Aspires, promoting cross-sector partnerships to improve education opportunities for Texas children. She serves on the board of directors of the Urban Leaders Fellowship Program, holds a master's degree in public policy from Vanderbilt University, and a bachelor's degree in business administration and psychology from UT Austin. Colette Vallot is the founder and managing partner of Entré Strategic Partners. She's an attorney with over 20 years of experience working in a broad array of industries, Fortune 500 companies, municipalities, and nonprofit organizations. She consults with local government entities, corporations, and associations drafting legislation, analyzing public policy, and advocating for clients. And her practice areas include energy, economic development, housing, procurement, disaster recovery, technology, and business-related policy, and has built trusted relationships with key decision makers, local and state elected officials, and business leaders across the state. She received her JD from Georgetown University Law Center and her bachelor's degree in public communications from American University in Washington, D.C., and is licensed to practice law and is a registered lobbyist in Texas. So suffice it to say, you have two brilliant women with a lot of experience and knowledge about what's going on in our session and how we can all work together collectively. So without further ado, I'll turn this over to Molly and Colette. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine, for that introduction, and really excited to be here with everyone today. I know it's a little different. Normally, we'd probably be having this talk in a conference room at the Capitol, prepping everybody to go out and have a bunch of meetings and take a look around the building. And it's definitely been a different and interesting session. And I think Colette would agree, could speak to that too. It's weird being in the Capitol when there's not, hundreds of students walking around on tours and big advocacy days. It's just a different experience this year, but the legislature is in full swing. They are passing bills. They are doing their business in the Capitol, and there are still lots of advocates getting engaged and involved, whether that's virtually doing a lot of Zoom meetings, virtual events like this to really raise awareness on key issues, and then also getting into those committee hearings still and testifying on bills and making sure that people's different perspectives are represented on these important bills. I will kind of dive in today just to give you a quick overview of kind of the structure of how this will work. Just going to talk a little bit about kind of what's happening with the session so far, kind of broadly, and then dive into a few key bills that the United Ways of Texas has been tracking specifically related to the nonprofit sector. And then I'll turn it over to Colette, and she's going to kind of talk us through like how you get involved, what you do, how you figure out information about bills, and how you kind of make sure your bill makes it through the legislative process. I always throw this diagram up. As you can see, there are many, many steps that it takes to get a bill passed in the Texas legislature. And so there's a lot of work and understanding that goes into making sure that happens. So just a quick overview on the 87th legislature. So the legislature comes in every odd numbered year. They meet for 140 days and they've got a lot of stuff to do. The only thing they have to do is pass the budget. So that's always a big topic of consideration, but they will pass 1,200 other bills relating to a bunch of stuff across the state. And so we've got Senate and a House that's majority Republican, but there are substantial Democrats in both of those houses. So there's a lot of cross-party work and a lot of different alignment on key issues. I think one of the biggest things to highlight is that the legislature hasn't met since a lot of things in our world have changed, right? So they are dealing with a lot of crises right now. There's the pandemic, so the governor was doing a lot of kind of the rulemaking and executive ordering around the pandemic because the legislature hasn't met since the COVID-19 started. They're dealing with Winter Storm Uri and the ERCOT fallout from the February storms and the blackouts. They're dealing with budget uncertainty because of the pandemic and just trying to estimate where our state finances will be, plus kind of the money coming in from the federal government that they're still working out. They also haven't met since the murder of George Floyd and kind of the racial justice and protests that have happened across the country. So there's also been substantial talk and bills filed around police brutality and those issues as well. So there's just a lot of issues on their plates that they're working through. But there's kind of three key players. We got the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the speaker of the House, and they all have their own set of priorities that have kind of driven the conversation. So you can see the governor, he's focused on broadband, on election work, on ERCOT as some of his key priorities. The lieutenant governor came out with a list at the beginning of session of 31 bills that were his priority list, and you can see what some of those were as well. So the houses are working to get their priorities passed, and then we'll come together to kind of finalize a lot of these bills and work to get them passed. So I won't pause there, but if there are questions that come up about any of this, feel free to pop them in the chat or the Q&A, and Colette and I can answer them as we go along, or at the end, either works. But so if you have questions about specific parts of this, happy to talk through them. A little bit kind of on how United Ways of Texas approaches the work. So I serve as part of our two-person policy team, and we really, as the United Ways of Texas, represent kind of the statewide public policy voice of our local United Ways. So we're a statewide membership organization for over 70 local United Ways who are working on these key issue areas in their local communities. And our United Ways know that kind of systems level change is critical to the work that they're doing on the ground. And so our United Ways inform the policy work that we do. So we focus kind of in 4 key areas. We track over 1,600 bills, weigh in on 300 of them probably throughout the process. In education, so looking at everything from early childhood to pathways to college and career. Health, so looking at social determinants of health, looking at prevention, early intervention. Maternal health has been a key focus for us. Financial stability, so talking about the social safety net, SNAP bills, fair lending, those issues. And the last bucket of our work is our nonprofit community strengthening work. So community strengthening has been kind of a core part of United Way for a long time. We're looking at things, several of our United Ways run 211 call centers where Texans in need can access information and referrals to resources. Digital inclusion has been a big priority of ours, especially because of the pandemic. And then kind of what I'll talk about the most is the nonprofit work, and that's been a newer part of our work. But really our United Ways have supported and have built strong relationships and coalitions with nonprofits in their communities and have served as capacity builders and support for nonprofits. And it's really a new space that we have stepped into a little bit more. If you were participating yesterday, we had released a report in 2019, the Built for Texas report, that was an economic impact report about the importance of the nonprofit sector, really laying out the case that, you know, the sector as a whole creates $100 billion in economic impact for the state. 1 in 8 private jobs are tied to the nonprofit sector across the state. The sector is really an economic impact and an engine for our communities across the state, and that the sector needs a voice, a unified presence at the state level to advocate for itself, like we see other industries doing at the legislature. So in partnership with the One Star Foundation, we've really been working with local organizations to try to think through what that could look like. And kind of the first step of that has been monitoring bills that would affect the sector as a whole. So focused less on specific issues, because we know there are coalitions that tackle a lot of these things. There's, food insecurity coalitions and fair lending coalitions and pre-K coalitions, but really kind of looking at more the capacity building infrastructure of that work. And so for us, that's meant kind of tracking bills in 4 key areas. And so I'll try to not overwhelm with details on these bills, but wanted to kind of highlight some of the key things that are moving in the areas of volunteerism and civic engagement, charitable contributions and tax exemptions for nonprofits, contracting and state agency relationships, and then overall state investment. So for us, we've been tracking a few key bills related to volunteerism. One has been sent to the governor's desk already. It's been a couple sessions in the making, but Senate Bill 44 by Senator Zaffarini, sponsored by Representative Leach. This bill just allows state employees to take paid leave during times of disaster to work with VOAD organizations. So voluntary organizations active in disaster. And this just kind of expands the definition of the types of organizations that state agencies can go work, or state agency employees can work with in these times of disaster, when we know that having volunteers on the ground is critical in terms of early response. Another bill, Senate Bill 2023 by Senator Powell, she filed, it's the creation of the Texas Tutor Corps program, so modeled after kind of the AmeriCorps model. And really, this bill was a response to understanding that students are going to need some accelerated help in the upcoming school years to address learning loss from the pandemic, and trying to create a model where young people could get engaged in kind of in tutoring and other opportunities, paid opportunities to support the K-12 school system. This bill is on the Senate calendar, but it hasn't moved in the House yet, so we'll wait and kind of see if it makes it across the finish line to the governor's desk this year. In kind of charitable contributions and tax exemptions, we track a bunch of stuff, and there's always lots of bills about charitable raffles and different kind of fundraising types of things to open them up to different organizations. There was one yesterday allowing sports teams to, that sell the tickets for the raffles during session to do those sales digitally instead of with paper tickets. So there's always kind of tweaks to how nonprofit organizations can do some fundraising. And so we track several of those bills that are moving throughout the process. There's also always property tax relief bills, so allowing a nonprofit who owns a building that is being used as maybe like a substance abuse recovery center to not have to pay property taxes, or low-income housing, those different types of bills. There are several of those moving through the process. And then a couple key ones. Senate Bill 1678 has passed the Senate, but it's still in House no man land, waiting for a hearing in the House. But it is Senate Bill 1678 by Senator Campbell, and it prevents the state from collecting and releasing certain kind of identifiable donor information. It's in response to, you may have heard of a California lawsuit that is being heard at the Supreme Court about California being able to request certain donor information that nonprofits file with the IRS at the federal level to be able to collect that information. So that's something that's moving through the process that we've been monitoring closely, just to make sure, one, that it is restrictive in terms of the amounts of information, but also to just to make sure to see what's happening in terms of that donor information and release. And the other one is House Bill 1367, and we may get into like kind of the logistics of session later, but this one was killed on the House floor a couple days ago, so people are trying to work to revive it, but it was by Representative Israel. And it would just, if you're a nonprofit that works, that is a disaster relief organization, and you use cars to kind of help in that disaster relief, it would exempt you from paying registration fees on that car. And so that bill had made it to the House floor, but hasn't passed as of yet. And then a couple other bills to throw at you right now as we talk through these things. But I know that for a lot of nonprofits, a key source of money that's coming in is from state agency contracts. And that contracting relationship is often difficult to navigate for nonprofits, especially smaller nonprofits, nonprofits that don't kind of have full-time procurement staffs or those sorts of things. So we track kind of the contracting work. We had a budget writer that didn't make it through the process this time, but we were really interested kind of when we started doing our Built for Texas work about how many nonprofits contract with the state, like how much business is happening. We know the state increasingly relies on nonprofit organizations to carry out kind of their programming. And we wanted to know what that relationship looked like. How many nonprofits, how big are these nonprofits? What communities are they serving? And the state just doesn't have that data. They don't even really collect it in any kind of systematic way. We worked with the Comptroller's Office, the Legislative Budget Board, individual state agencies trying to figure out if we could get a number, and it's not something that the state currently collects. So that's definitely been a longer term goal of ours, is to really have a better understanding of that relationship and to start collecting some better data so that we kind of understand, just like we know about other types of business relationships the state has, how the state is engaging with and supporting nonprofits. Our guess is that they work with quite a few of them and should be kind of investing in their capacity and organizational support so that they can carry out those contracts. But there were a couple other ones. Senate Bill 799 by Senator Nelson. They did a lot of contracting work the past few sessions. So there was a small bill to kind of clean up some of that some state agencies had found some unintended consequences during implementation that's moving through and should pass. And then there was another bill, House Bill 3100, that was about capping the amount of indirect costs a nonprofit could charge on a contract, but that bill has not gone anywhere. It has been referred, but it hasn't even had a hearing. So I will highlight a few more on this page before I kind of turn it over to Colette to talk about what you do once you know which one of these bills or other bills you want to follow. The last kind of key area we were at was overall state investment. So we know nonprofits, like I said, the state relies on them to do a lot of the work. And we know that when the state makes budget decisions and they make cuts to certain programs, oftentimes nonprofits are the ones that are kind of picking up that work and that monetary contribution, and oftentimes are funding programs that have cuts from the state or are no longer funded. So the safety net is a key one, and bills we always track. So there are a couple bills to kind of refine SNAP eligibility and making it easier for seniors to be able to access SNAP benefits and to stay in that program. There's a big broadband bill, House Bill 5 and Senate Bill 5. House Bill 5 is the one that's moving. It's an omnibus broadband bill that would kind of provide the state infrastructure in terms of an office and a council and a broadband plan, kind of all of those big strategic priorities that would help the state really move to close that digital divide and to move on broadband, which is really critical in terms of having a statewide plan, being able to draw down federal dollars, to be able to really address some key challenges that we know exist in terms of the almost 1 million Texans that don't have access to broadband right now. There were a couple others. House Bill 3871 and Senate Bill 117 was the Live Well Texas program, and it was Texas's attempt to expand healthcare coverage is the phrasing they were using, but it was a way to work to try to draw down more federal Medicaid dollars. That bill in the House, 3871, has 76 co-sponsors, which is more than half of the House. So you would think that bill could pass. It has not even had a hearing. So definitely some politics at play in terms of what Texas wants to do in terms of making sure that more Texans can access affordable health insurance. And then House Bill 2021 by Representative Bonin is a bill that is looking to address kind of how to appropriate federal money. And I think we may touch on this in a little more. Texas is about to get billions of dollars from the American Rescue Plan Act. It still has some money from previous COVID relief acts. And there's a lot of discussion in the legislature about who should be making the decisions about where the money goes. Should it be the governor? Should it be the legislature? Should it be, like 2021 suggests, a subset of the legislature, so a 10-person board? So there's definitely a lot of conversation around how we're going to allocate that money, who's going to be making those decisions as well. And so that kind of leads to the state budget, which is always the priority that everyone is really focused on, but nonprofits should be too, in terms of understanding where money's going, what programs are being fully funded, partially funded, and they're working hard on those decisions right now, including the restoration of many agencies had to do 5% cuts last year because of the pandemic, everything from federal student aid program to health programs. And so a lot of those cuts are being restored. So I know I just ran through a ton of bills all about nonprofits, but it's really important that there are people that are looking out kind of for the sector as a whole on this. And I wanted to highlight one other bill that really, I think, demonstrates the reason why the sector needs kind of eyes on the legislative process and everything that's happening, because oftentimes things that you think are unrelated to your sector or that are kind of not dealing with any topic that's within your policy agenda, when you start to dig a little deeper, you realize that it could have impacts to your work. And for us, one of those finds has been House Bill 3979, which has been in the news for a lot of reasons this past week. It is the civics bill, as it was being called on the House floor. And there were a lot of discussions and conversations. It didn't kind of fall directly into our advocacy or policy agenda, but when you read kind of the lines of the bill, there was a provision that would have prevented any teacher from giving credit or extra credit for any student engaged in a service learning, a volunteer opportunity, or anything with any nonprofit organization that does advocacy. So even if the project was just about, we have United Ways that have high school students help prepare tax returns for low-income families, right? That program, because United Ways does advocacy work, not in that area, would have not been allowed to work for course credit. So this would have affected the Boys and Girls Club, the Humane Society. There were all these examples of nonprofits who are doing great work. We're trying to build these connections, these work-based learning pathways, right? These real-world experiences for our students. And this bill would have prevented those relationships from happening. And it was totally unrelated kind of from the intent and the caption of the bill, so you wouldn't have even noticed unless you kind of really dug in. That provision was removed on the House floor on Monday, or on Tuesday actually. And so we're hoping it stays out in the Senate, but that's just kind of another example of the reason why having your eyes on all 5,000 to 6,000 bills is a really difficult thing to do, but that it's really important, that oftentimes it's the bills that will sneak up on you and surprise you in this process, that if you're not kind of working in coalitions with people who can help manage that and make sure that the sector is protected and that our interests are kind of being advanced through that. So I will pause there. Again, if you have questions about specific bills, Colette and I are happy to talk about them, throw them in the chat or the Q&A. But with that, I will turn it over to Colette to talk a little bit about what you do once you know some things in the legislature are moving. There are a lot of ways you can get engaged and involved.
Great, thank you, Molly. Gosh, lots of information and great information. So I will pick up from where Molly left off, and I would say that one of the most important things about how you can play a role, and we've heard this a lot, during this session, because it's been a little bit of an interesting, and sometimes sessions get very contentious, but I have found that this session particularly, people are getting up. Some of the members, particularly on the House side, are like, have you read your bill? Do you know your bill? And so the most important thing is to actually read the bill. Sometimes ones, particularly with budget and all that sort of stuff. I mean, they're literally this thick, hundreds of pages. But some of the other bills that affect you all, it's important to actually read the bill because, particularly with the one that Molly was just talking about, the civics bill, it really did impact, nonprofits, and that was a lot of questions that went on during the discussions on the House floor. So I will start by saying, oh, there's one question. What was the civics bill number? Is it 3797 or 3979?
3979.
Okay.
I'll drop it in the chat too.
Okay, great. Thank you, Molly. So number one on how you can play a role is you first have to get to know who your members are. And there's a great website called Who Represents Me. And yeah, pull it up right there. Thank you so much, Molly. If you put in your actually street address, city, zip code, because sometimes there may be some overlap, or you're one street over from, when I lived in Dallas, actually, I'm literally right on the border of Representative Chairman Anchia's district and the Chairman Morgan Meyer's district. So, it's important that you actually put in your address, and or this may be different from where your organization is headquartered and who you all represent as the executives in the nonprofits. So it's really important to look that information up. And so one of the things about getting to know who represents you is that you can actually go and then begin to build relationships with those members, your House members or your senators. And it's really important that you know both their Capitol staff, sometimes who go back to the district, or sometimes the district staff comes back in and helps them out during legislative session. So, as many things as you can go to that involve staff members. I know last year, because of COVID, was really an interesting year. I actually happened to attend an event. I was in the North Texas area, and Senator Angela Paxton was there. And I've known her and Attorney General Paxton for a long time, since he was actually a state representative. So I'm still friends with her staff members, and so they invited me to an event that had to do with providing health care for low income folks. And she came, she spoke, and so we're always saying hi. So it's really important to go to those kinds of things. And by the same token, it's really important when your organization has events, invite them to join, so that they know, whether it's a gala or whether it's something else, so that they can actually keep abreast of what your organization is doing and know that intimately. So I'm saying some things that are kind of basic, but it really is important for them to be able to understand exactly what you all are doing, and so you can keep them apprised of what's going on. The other thing about knowing some of the senators, I always find out little bits of information. So I was in a chairman's office the other evening, got caught in the rain. So I said, okay, I'll just sit here for a while. And Representative Ernest Bales came in, and they were talking about, what he does for a living. And this kind of, I was watching the House last night, and they were talking about deer cloning, and they were talking about Ernest Bales, and he actually, for a profession, he and Molly, maybe you can help me out on this. And I don't know if I don't know exactly what his bio says, but apparently he does some insemination of deer, and that's how he makes a living. And so very interesting, sort of, I don't know anybody who does that. And apparently last night, there's only one person who does deer cloning. That's not what Representative Bales does, but it's always fun when you know these things about kind of what they do for a living. So if you ever actually sit down and have a conversation with those members, you can talk to them about those things. And, people love to talk about themselves, right? So, like, oh, Representative Bales, can you tell me a little bit more about what you do? So just, it's important to read up on them before you go in. And like I said, maybe find a champion if you guys have something smaller that you're looking to get passed in a particular session. most of the legislators have their bios on their websites, et cetera. And then if you just, kind of follow the news about different things. And then, Twitter is amazing to really figure out, how people are thinking, what they comment on, what they tweet out and all of that. So it's really important to know that. The next step in this process is really to know the legislative process. The Legislative Reference Library is an amazing website, and they really provide a lot of information about current issues, legislation, both current legislation as well as archived legislation. There is a way that you can actually go into the legislation and put in the particular topics. And when we go, when we pull up Texas Legislature online, I can show you guys how to find some of that information. But I can't say enough good about this LRL. There is a way for you to go. There's a whole glossary. There is a whole pictorial that talks about, what happens with the process of, from a bill being filed to the end, and, the governor's desk for a veto, et cetera. You can go on committees. You can look at different sessions. So I would recommend, if you don't know really about the process, that you should go online and poke around and hear, when you've got some time. It's really a lot of great information. Let's see. Let's talk a little bit about the bill filing deadlines. I mean, we're actually on what they call the 122nd day of this legislative session. But before we get to all of that, in November preceding every odd numbered year, the first Monday after a general election is when bills can begin to be pre-filed. And then there's a cutoff, and then it starts again. Actually, I don't remember it. Yeah, that doesn't cut off. You can just actually file bills until the 60th day. And it's a little known. When I first got into this, I didn't really understand. I said, why is it that, nothing really happens the first 60 days? Well, constitutionally, no bills can be passed in the first 60 days unless they're emergency legislation that is basically put on by the governor. And so that's why, with this session, we missed the chamber days and all of that stuff, which is actually really fun and interesting for people who don't otherwise get to the Capitol. But it's a way for you to come in with your groups and actually get to know who your members are. And usually their offices are wide open, and you can go and visit with different folks. So the bill filing deadline is actually important, because if you get a bill filed earlier, there's a chance that it actually gets assigned a lower number. And usually bills 1, 2, and 3 are designated for very important bills that are from the leadership, the lieutenant governor, the speaker of the House. But a lot, if the number is lower, then there's a better chance oftentimes that your bill will actually get heard in committee and then get out of committee, et cetera. So Molly, can you move the screen over just a little? Oh, never mind, I can do that. Let's talk a little bit about, once you get the bill filed, what the process actually is. And so basically, a bill is filed, there is a caption that is assigned to it, and there is a group of lawyers, drafting attorneys, in a group called Legislative Counsel, where actually bills go to get vetted and make sure that the language is good, et cetera. And it usually goes back to the member's office, and only a member can file a bill. But what role you can play in this is you bring ideas to the member, or if you've got somebody who's got some experience on your staff, or perhaps in an association that you might have, you can actually have some sort of draft of the bill so that you can present that to the member and say, here's what we're trying to accomplish. And they then send that information over to Legislative Counsel. Legislative Counsel sends it back, and then the bill is actually read for the first time, and then it gets assigned to a committee on the House side by the Speaker of the House, and on the Senate side by the Lieutenant Governor. And so there are lots of different committees going back to Texas Legislature Online, which we haven't gone to that screen yet. Yeah, no, TLO, if you can go to TLO. Oh, or that one tells you also. These are the different committees that are in the House, and sometimes they change during legislative session. Sometimes they do away with committees. Sometimes they consolidate committees and rename the committees. I think last session or 2 sessions ago, there was a small business committee, which Angie Chen Button was actually the chair of. That committee is no longer in existence. I think they changed it to a different committee. She is not the chair of that one, international relations, but there was something else that had to do with small business. So so it's important that the bill get to a committee, and this is where, excuse me, a lot of the lobbyists come in, and then folks, we really wait for what's called committee assignments, which usually happens mid to late February. And it's really important because if you've got a friend, an advocate who is a legislative member, who is the chair or the vice chair of a committee or is on a committee, then you have a good chance of hopefully being able to get that bill heard in committee so that it can then get out of committee and then get to the floor for a vote. And that's what they've been doing. But since today is 122nd day, really committee hearings, if your bill is not out of committee, it's kind of what we call dead. So that's really the committee part of it. And so it's really important when your bill is in committee, there are a lot of things that can go on. You've got to really work the members of the committee to make sure that they have an understanding of the bill. And so what happens in committee is that the member goes and they do what they call, they lay out the bill, and that means that they explain the bill to the committees. And then they have, there are witnesses who can register to testify for the bill, in opposition to the bill or on the bill, which basically means that they're neutral. They oftentimes have resource witnesses, maybe if it's a state agency type related thing, so that some of the members can ask questions if they have any of questions regarding the particular bill. So it's important that you get subject matter experts to actually come in and testify, whether you are for the bill or opposed to the bill. And after that committee hearing happens, usually they leave things pending unless it's very important, or perhaps they're getting to the end of session and they want to vote it out of committee that particular day, or if it's a non-controversial bill. And I'm getting a little bit into the weeds here, but it's really a fascinating process when you watch a bill from start to finish. On the House side, particularly, a committee can go to the general calendar or what's called the local and consent calendar. And so there are 2 different kinds of calendars that are in the House. Local and consent is basically if it is a sort of local bill, which means that it's for a particular, area, and whether it might deal with a part of the state or a city or municipal area that has a population, over a certain size or under a certain size, et cetera. So, and or it passes unanimously. So it being a local bill, or, that whether there's unanimous consent. If one person votes nay on the committee to get the bill out, then it's got to go to the general floor calendar. But then it actually goes through another committee called the Calendars Committee. And if it doesn't get out of that committee, then it never makes it to the floor. So once again, go to the legislative reference library, and it talks about all of this sort of stuff. But the committee part of it is very, very important, because that's one of the ways that you can actually kill a bill. And Molly was talking about this earlier. If it never gets out of committee, that means that they don't vote it out, and it just sits in that particular committee. And so it never gets to the full House or full Senate for it to be voted on by all of the other members. And so if it sits in a committee, then that's not good. If it then sits in, if it gets out of the individual committee and then sits in the calendars committee, that's also another way that the bill can be killed, and you've got to actually work the calendars committee. And that's actually one of the biggest and best committees to be assigned to, because if you are the chair of the calendars committee, then basically you can control the fate of many bills, especially if you never let them out of the calendars committee. And then going back to Texas Legislature Online, if we can click on that, this is really another amazing site. It doesn't go into quite as much detail as the Legislative Reference Library from a historical perspective. I reference this site because I watch the video broadcast daily, and so if you take a look at the legislative activity and click on video broadcasts, you can watch both the House and the Senate when they are actually in session, as well as the committees. And then it also has a place for you to look at what's on the calendar to be heard for that particular day in the House and the Senate. And then it's got information about the number of bills that have been filed, et cetera. You can look at votes for each member and how they voted on particular things. At the top where it says search legislation, you can actually go back and look at previous years of when they, for particular bills. So like in the 86th session, you can actually go back and look up a bill number. For example, I had a bill that's the exact same bill that was filed as last session. It did not get passed. It didn't make it through. And so I'll tell you guys a quick anecdotal story. This particular bill was in the Insurance Committee on the House side and has basically been assigned to the Transportation Committee on the Senate side. And I have a relationship from my former days with my energy company, TXU Energy, when I cover East Texas. So I have a relationship with Senator Nichols, and we had been talking to his staff and the committee director and the committee clerk. That's another part that I left out about committees. It's important when you're trying to get your bill set that the staff understand, because sometimes they can either, maybe not understand the intent of the bill. So it's important for you to go and talk to staff members and say, this is actually the intent of the bill, because when I went to talk to Senator Nichols last Thursday, and I actually didn't think that he would be able to talk to me because the Senate had let out at about 3 o'clock, and I was in his office at about 5:30. And so he came out and he spoke to me. And so I said, I'd love to get this bill set. It's made it this far and it got out of the House, and it's a really good bill and it's good governance. And so, and he asked me a few questions. He's like, well, I'm not sure that my staff had that understanding of the bill. So I'm so glad you came and talked to me. And so he actually texted me later and said, I think you single-handedly saved this bill because you came to talk to me specifically about it. And, his general counsel and his chief of staff was actually in the office and understood it. So it's important for you to really understand your bill. Talk to the member, and then if your organization has the great fortune of being able to hire a lobbyist or join an association that has a lobbyist, they can help navigate through some of these things. So I was really happy, and I went back to my client and I was like, okay, I pulled the bill from the jaws of death because otherwise it wouldn't have been heard. Now it's not going to be heard until next, I think, Monday or Tuesday in the Senate. So that's very late in the process. But, while on the House side, there is, this calendar for the end of the session. Once again, today being the 122nd day, today is the last day that bills can be read on second reading. And otherwise, they're all dead if they haven't gotten to second reading today. You've got a little bit more time on the Senate. So we've got some more time on the Senate side to get this bill passed through the Senate so that hopefully it can be passed. So I hope some of that information makes sense. So one of the other things that I want to tell you, and I'm hoping that I'm not that you all don't this process is not just being so redundant, but so basically the same thing happens on the House side as on the Senate side. So once your bill gets through the entire process, first reading, being assigned to a committee, and then actually making it through the whole process, the individual committee calendars getting to the floor for a full vote by the full House or Senate, the exact same process happens in the other chamber. And so you've got to go through the exact same process again. So my story about Senator Nichols is, once again, it had gone through the House, got out of the House, and is now on the Senate side. So it's got to go through the same process. And generally there's a little bit of deference, when it goes through one House, and then it's got to go through the same process. But a lot of times it's not. And so if bills pass both houses and there are some differences, they then do what's called a conference committee. And so that's when they sort of work out the details of things. So once again, that's all in the legislative reference library process. The one thing that I want to make sure that I tell you guys about is one-pagers. All during this process, particularly once it gets to committee and you know that the bill is being heard in committee, it's important to develop, a one-pager that you can actually go and give to the committee members that basically is a synopsis of the bill and says, this is why we would like for you all to support or oppose this bill. And it's really great if you put that information, what the bill number is, support or oppose, and a few bullet points of why they should support or oppose the bill. I've seen one-pagers that have a whole lot of text. Staff members are not going to read all of that text. And so it's really important that you try to, present your arguments as succinctly as you can about why they should support or, not support a bill. And then once it gets to the floor, and you do the same thing with the calendars committee, and then you do the same thing once it gets to a floor. And so hopefully if you have a team who can actually, meet and talk about which members might be opposed to it or on the opposite side of what you'd like for your bill, you can go and what they call work those members. So that's the process sort of in a nutshell. On this 122nd day, and once again, every year at the end of session, there's a calendar that is produced by a group, I don't know if it's LBB or what, but about the specific dates and the deadlines. It's important to follow that calendar, because if your bill, once again, hasn't had a second reading by this point, then you can pretty much assume that it's not going to go anywhere. So on a day like today, there's not a whole lot you can do if your bill hasn't made it to second reading yet. But if it has, then if there's some aspect of your bill that you didn't get in, you can actually always go and get a member to see if they can do a floor amendment. And they're sometimes called pre-filed amendments, and there's a deadline of 48 hours before the pre-filed amendments should be done. But a lot of times they do what they're called floor amendments, or there's sometimes amendments on third reading. So that's another way. If some aspect of your bill hasn't gotten in, you can actually go and get one of those champions, or perhaps your legislative member for your district, to actually do a floor amendment. Another way to kill the bill is what they call chubbing or filibuster, or a point of order. A lot of times, yesterday this was happening a lot. That's a way to slow the calendar down, because yesterday it was a 20-page calendar, and I don't think that they got to everything on the calendar. So when they start up today, they're going to have to go back to the other bills. And then once again, remember, if your bill hasn't gotten to what they call second reading, which is after it's gotten out of committee, then it really has no chance of getting through to the full House or Senate. So on the House side, they call it chubbing, which basically means that they run out of time, and in the Senate, they call it a filibuster. The one other thing that you can do pretty much at this late date is, like, if your bill didn't make it through, you might, what they do, call it find a vehicle, which means if there is another bill that is they use the word germane. If it is, there's a law that they're trying to change that is germane to your bill, then you can try to get somebody to do an amendment to add something on. And so that actually has to go through legislative council, and then legislative council will determine whether it's germane. And, but that's one of the final things that you can do, is actually try to find a vehicle to attach your bill to, so that you can see if it can get across the finish line. After all of this process is finished in both houses, and then you've got the conference committee and the bill is finally passed and engrossed, it goes to the governor's desk. And basically the governor has 10 days after the session to either veto the bill, let it sit without signature, and then it becomes law. So it's a very long process. I would recommend if you all can go onto the Texas Legislature online, particularly in these last couple of days, and watch some of this. It's all very, very interesting and fascinating. Last Saturday, there were a few things that happened. Some members' bills were killed, and there was sometimes what they call retribution. And some of those members will kill another bill that just because they don't like members. So this happened last week on a couple items. And so I think some people were surprised by all of that. So it once again, it really is a fascinating process to watch. And is, sometimes we lobbyists refer to it as really the sausage making process. And so I would recommend that, or if you can be in the chamber to actually see what's going on and to see which members are caucusing with the others, it makes for a very interesting day. And particularly, obviously, if your bill is on the floor, then it would be more beneficial for you to see that and hear how the members argue about your bills. And then the other thing is that there's what they call the front mic, which is where they go and put on the House side and lay out the bill, and then the back mic, which is where other members come to ask questions either in support of or against a particular bill. So it's fun to watch the dynamics of it all. So the final thing I will say is, yes, knowledge is key about this. There is another bill that was this session about taxpayer funded lobbying. And so if you're, and I don't think that either one of those will make it through the House or the Senate. So it looks like those bills are dead. And I work for some municipalities. And so I personally am against that bill. But if you all can afford to hire a lobbyist or join an association who has lobbyists who can help you navigate through this process, that is most important, because we do know members, know some of the processes, not that you all don't know it, but this is what we do for a living. And so it's important to hire an expert. And so most lobbyists would have you come along with them and say, look, this is my subject matter expert, but I'm really good at getting through the process. But it is also important that lobbyists can wear lots of different hats and be able to speak to bills and speak to the process, et cetera. So join an association, join a lobbyist, make sure that you keep in touch with your members in the interim. That's really important, that you develop those relationships with them so that they can understand what your organization does and know how to fight for you and advocate for you when they're not doing things. Lots of times there are studies in the interim that are really important. So if you all need something to be looked at and studied, then that's perhaps something that can get done through a particular committee. So there's a lot going on. I know I gave a lot of information and Molly gave a lot of information. So if you've got any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, or I think our email addresses are on the last slide of the presentation. Feel free to reach out and ask any questions, and I'm sure both of us will be happy to help out. I know I will.
Thank you, Colette, and thank you, Molly. I think there's so much to know, and you all have so much experience. For those of us who are in small shops, I know that AFP, United Ways of Texas, we keep an eye on this stuff and sort of collect it and put it in some repositories for folks to review. But are there any, two questions actually, are there any listservs for nonprofits where people can sort of be apprised of things that are happening in the legislative session versus having to go and pull the information? Is there anything like that that exists that might help those of us who just don't have a big team, or perhaps our own lobbyists or someone to help us kind of cull through that? And two, how do you get to the governor? So before he or she signs that bill, what's the process for that?
Molly, you want to take the first question? Or, I mean, I know that TLO, there is a way that you can actually build, you know, a list of bills that you are tracking. So, and you can set up alerts so that anytime anything happens with that particular bill, you will get a text message or an email message saying, you know, your bills, there's movement with your bill. And so you can track it that way.
Great.
Yeah, I think definitely in TLO you can kind of create that list, but if you're looking for something curated, I will drop in the chat. We are working on building this out. So there is an advocacy page on texasnonprofits.org, or txnonprofits, I should say, .org, that we're updating with kind of some of the key bills that I talked about. So that is a way. There is a link where you can sign up and give us your email, because we're hoping to kind of build out those updates and things. And then there are a lot of statewide associations. So like Texans Care for Children does a lot of bill tracking in early childhood. So if that's something interests you, they have a listserv you can try, you know, sign up for. Every Texan, Feeding America, some of these big statewide coalitions. So if you're a member of them, or your organization's like affiliate in the coalition, a lot of times, especially during session, they will put out weekly, bi-weekly updates on kind of where their priority bills are going. And they'll often include action alerts. So like, click here to send a letter, you know, to your representative about this, where they often provide talking points or sample, you know, sentences like, here's the bill number, here's what it does, put in the story about why it matters to your organization, right? Customize it. So there are a lot of action alerts. Also, if you just follow the hashtag TXLEGE, so TXLEGE, a lot of these organizations are tweeting out about their priority bills and putting those alerts in that hashtag. And so, I mean, that's, I'd say, where TextLedge followers spend a lot of time, you know, keeping track of who's on what side of things and what's happening. So.
And to your second question, Catherine, about how you get to the governor, gosh, you know, you can go knock on the door of the governor's mansion.
Yeah.
You know, it's important that you know, the governor's staff is large. You know, his chief of staff, Louis Signs, you know, if you know him, that certainly is helpful. You'll often see him walking around the Capitol. You know, there's some other folks that have specific areas that, you know, they handle for the governor. And so, you know, it's important to perhaps try to develop relationships with those guys. And then it's interesting because you see people, you know, chiefs of staff will move around, and then they'll go to a particular, you know, they may go to the governor's office, or you've got, you know, people who were formerly in legislative offices who are now lobbyists, et cetera. So it's, you know, in as much as you can spend some time at the Capitol, you know, being able to see those people, you know, that's very helpful. Once again, this business is really about relationships from the pure lobbyist perspective. I know that many of you all don't have time to do that stuff and be in the Capitol every day, but let's face it, it's 140 days every other year. And then the first 60 days, you know, no real legislation is passed unless it's the emergency legislation. So, but, you know, there's probably, I don't know of a specific website where you can see who the governor's staff is, but I'm sure it's published somewhere. Maybe. And so, you know, but if you can, you know, look that up and say, look, my bill is passed, but, and one of the things that we often do is, you know, I represent the city of Houston this session. And so we'll often, you know, write a letter to the governor explaining, you know, how this bill might help Houston, or how a particular bill might, you know, the city of Houston or something like that. You know, that's the real last ditch effort. If a bill has passed and you like it to be vetoed, you know, to see if you can get the governor to veto it. So, it doesn't end until it's actually either signed or that period is passed after session. So
Right.
try to get to know some of the governor's staff, I would say.
Great.
Or the governor himself or the first lady.
Right. True. That's true. Well, and it all comes down to, as you both have said, and as we as fundraisers inherently know, relationship building and cultivating the relationships and sustaining them and continuing to stay engaged. So we've hit our time limit. I could talk forever about this, and I'm so grateful to you both for providing such rich information. Thank you for giving us all of this great content to think about, and this gives us sort of time to think about next session as well. So as we wrap up the 87th. So thank you all for attending today. And we have one more session at 10:15 from AFP Global, where we'll talk about national legislation, which, as we all know, trickles down to our local legislation as well. So thank you all, Colette and Molly. So grateful for your time and expertise today. So we'll see you next time.
Of course, thanks.
Take care.